In this week's episode, we talk to Chris Floyd about sustaining a career in photography. He talks about the changes he's had to make in his practice and tips on skills to nurture and nourish. He gives us some anecdotes from photo shoots with former prime ministers to legendary rock stars, and ultimately, some incredibly useful lessons he's learnt along the way. This episode is absolutely studded with excellent insight, so sit back, lend us your ears, and enjoy. So, on this week's show, we are joined by photographer Chris Floyd, who has been working in the industry for over 25 years. And welcome, Chris, to the show.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's quite all right. We wanted to get you on because we wanted to be able to talk to somebody who's existed and survived, and not only survived, but flourished over that time with working in this industry. And I guess we're keen to kind of hear your viewpoints on a few things and kind of understand really how you've managed to survive.
I don't really know.
Start by telling us a little bit about yourself. Like, where are you from originally? How did you get into photography? You know, the kind of, you can do it as the edited fast version if you like. Most people will be aware of you, I believe.
I grew up in Surrey, on the edge of 2 miles outside the M25. So right on the cusp of sort of not country, but not really town and not really city. A real kind of, it certainly wasn't a no man's land, but it was neither one thing or another in lots of ways. And at night you could actually kind of see, on a dark night, you could see the kind of glow of the yellow sodium lights of London from where I lived. If you managed to climb up a high enough tree. And I grew up also fascinated with the 1960s. I grew up fascinated with the history of London, and I felt a bit aggrieved that I had to live in this sort of bit slightly nice, bucolic, but boring village, so close yet so far. I mean, I've said before that London was 25 years and 25 light years away at the same time. Sorry, not 25 years. I've said before that London was 25 miles and 25 light years away at the same time. So it was all that. And then the photography, I was desperate to find something that could take me to the big city. And I was I realized I needed to find something that would be my route in. And photography happened to be the thing. And I think that was, my dad had a camera. He had a Pentax camera, 35mm, and he used to let me use it from time to time. And as I got a bit older, into my kind of mid-teens, he started to sort of trust me with it, and I would just go off and take pictures of my friends or stuff, still life things. But the catalyst really was that I saw this book in our school library, just a photography book, and one of the pictures in it was a few pages of David Bailey's 1960s portraits. So that was of like John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Michael Caine, Gene Shrimpton, all these kind of Peter Sellers, all these iconic 60s people. And I was just completely, literally knocked sideways by just how stark and pared down they were. And they were square with a black border and a white background, and just the way he kind of framed people, and he cut their foreheads off, and he would do this thing with, like the Lennon McCartney one especially. He did this thing with when he would photograph pairs of people, twos, where he would make one person lean slightly to the left and the other person slightly to the right, and it would create this kind of, this sort of flow through the image that I found really kind of hypnotic. And I was fascinated by it because up until that point, the only exposure to photography I'd had as a profession was weddings, obviously, and sort of high street family portrait studios, which obviously were really prevalent then. Every decent sized town had a photography studio. And me and my sister were taken to one when we were young, and had to put on like a tie and jacket and pose for the photographer. But that was that wasn't cool at all, or interesting. And so up until that point, that was what I thought photography was, And then I saw this photography, and it was just like, oh wow, you can do that. You're allowed to do that. You can do this. And then I realised that it was also, very early on, I realised that it was the key to it opened doors into worlds that you never would normally get access to. So it would allow you to meet and interact with people who define the times in which we live, no matter what age you are. Whether you're Julia Margaret Cameron doing pictures of, I don't know, Lewis Carroll or Charles Dickens or someone, or whether you're David Bailey photographing Lennon and McCartney. It gives you a way to meet the people that define the age. And I found that really intoxicating and exciting.
Do you still find it intoxicating and exciting?
I do still find it intoxicating and exciting, for sure, yeah. When I get asked to photograph someone who is... I'll take a slight side journey here. One of my pet hates is the use of the word celebrity to describe what actually celebrities or people who are well known is probably only 15% of 20% of the work I do. The other 80% is what I call normal people, and I think so. The word celebrity for the kind of work that I take pride in doing is a bit derogatory, because I tend to photograph people who are the absolute best in the world at what they do. They are literally excellent. They excel at their work, whether that's I don't know, the Chinese pianist Lang Lang, or Paul McCartney, or I can't think of anyone else now. But the best guy there's a guy at the moment,
Mo Farah.
Mo Farah, yeah, sports people, and they're people. They are the absolute top of the tree in their game. And I think the word celebrity is often, it's a bit derisory, and that's the bit that I'm not excited by the fame. I'm excited by the fact that I'm going to meet someone that has not run faster than anyone else at his sprint distance, or at his running distance ever.
Yeah.
And
because you are like when you were saying that photography is a key, it enables you to meet these amazing people who've got these achievements, and you are stood in the same room as the long distance world champion
lorry driver.
But you are you like you say, you are in a room with the best of the best, and there is something amazing about achievements.
Yeah, you can have. I photographed, all politics aside, and the political element is not relevant in this conversation. But I did David Cameron's cover of his autobiography last year, and I had him to myself for 4 hours, and the actions that have been the forces that have been unleashed by a decision that he took 4 or 5 years ago, and to be in the same room alone with that,
that's a lot of trust. That's a lot of trust on his part
with that man. Is quite. I think it's quite astounding that you can, and for him to talk to me and treat me as an equal and with respect, and for him to respect the job I have to do, and for him to, listen to what I have to say and respond to what I'm asking him to do. Whether it's someone like him, or whether it's, as you say, Mo Farah, the best people are the people that recognise that you have a job to do, and
sure.
And that they treat you with respect and allow you to do that job to the best of your capability.
Do you keep a journal, Chris? Because one thing I love about looking at your blog is that not only do you kind of write quite candidly about the kind of the situations you find yourself in, but quite often you'll attribute nice little quotes that really let you peek behind the curtain of these personalities. And it's something I looked at and thought, I really wish I'd done that more so far, jotting little things down from those interactions.
I don't really keep a journal, but what I do have a really good memory for things that people say to me, and because often I'll come away from a scenario and in my mind it's like, oh, that was the key moment, the moment he or she said that or did that, that's the thing you have to remember. But what I do is I just write down I write down things like that will remind me later. So Cameron, for instance, we had this unbelievable it was no more than a 30-second exchange about Fleabag. But when we finished, I wrote down like Fleabag, Sister, Cemetery, and that was it. And then I knew later, and then those three words will just trigger in me what we talked about. So we were in a studio, Loft Studios, which is in Wormwood, by Wormwood Scrubs, and it overlooks. The studio on one side overlooks Kensal Rise Cemetery, which is a huge cemetery, and we're on the first floor upstairs, looking out the window, this enormous cemetery, and Cameron is just standing at the window, and I'm sort of in the room, and he's just kind of staring, like with a 1,000-yard stare at the cemetery, and then he just says, "Have you seen Fleabag?" And in my head, I was like, why has he brought that up? And then suddenly it triggered. I realised why he brought it up, because in the first series of Fleabag, there are all these scenes where she kind of goes for these walks with her sister, and they walk through Kensal Rise Cemetery, and that's what thing. So I go, because they filmed some of it in here, didn't they? The walks with her sister. And then he said, I love the relationship in that with her sister. I just think the sister's amazing. That whole dynamic between the two sisters is fabulous. I love it. And then there's this kind of really awkward silence, and I just kind of don't know what to say, and I just sort of, the urge to kind of try and fill the silence with something profound or witty. But what comes out of my mouth is, I really fancy her actually. And Cameron, still doing the 1,000-yard stare, just kind of goes, yeah. And that, although that only lasted 30 seconds, in my mind, that's for me the unique memory of that whole shoot, because he is not going to have that conversation with anyone else probably ever, and that's my kind of unique gift bag that I get to take away.
Yeah,
that's it. But, so going back to your question at the beginning of how getting, what inspired you to get into photography and stuff, it was really the opportunity to meet people, have a conversation with them, whether it's light or heavy or profound or banal, and take that away, and from that be able to build a life of experiences based on meeting some really brilliant and interesting people along the way. And the photography part of it, in a way, it's almost, obviously it's not unimportant, but it's a byproduct of, there's a photographer, Steve Pike, portrait photographer, who said once that a photograph is the record of a conversation. And I really always clung on to that quote, that thing he said, and that's how I feel about it. This is our life. We're here. You're here on this planet for a short period of time, and I want my time here to be not dull. So that is these are the experiences that make it not dull. And the photography part of it is a really, really lovely byproduct of the opportunity to meet people who define the times in which we live.
Very
So
nice.
taking that on, because I mean that's a really interesting point, and I've heard elsewhere you talk about the idea of I think I heard you quote, is it Marty Feldman's quote about the kind of uh,
Yeah.
don't enjoy doing something at the time, but enjoy having done it. The kind of idea of type 2 fun sometimes, and I guess both myself and Tom can probably relate to that a little bit. Well, I speak more for myself. Of there's certainly certain jobs where they're really difficult at the time, and it's not until afterwards that you kind of can relax enough because and actually say, okay, that was all right. I did okay there, and it's I can see the I'm glad that I've done it.
Mm.
Do you? I mean, do you feel that? I guess what I'm interested in is through this journey that you've taken of doing all these shoots, you know, and the multitude of variety of work that you've taken on. What, looking back, is there anything that you would have? I mean, not to get too morbid, is there anything you would have told your 20-year-old self, like any kind of advice that you would have given yourself back then? Because I think we all suffer to some degree. I mean, I don't know a photographer out there, unless there's some kind of Trumpian character who doesn't suffer from some degree of imposter syndrome or sense of inferiority with when it comes to what they doing what they do, and confidence maybe is the word I'm looking for. But what would you say to your 20-year-old self if you had to give them advice going into this as a career?
Oh, I think about that quite a lot actually, and I don't think I've really changed much in terms of the building blocks of my personality or character. You know, I'm profoundly unconfident in lots of ways, and also socially quite shy and withdrawn. I mean, I would define myself almost certainly as an introvert. I don't enjoy social interaction outside of work. I don't really enjoy it in work either, but it's I find it hard. I find it a struggle. You know that my brother-in-law is an 100% extrovert, and he, you know, the difference between introverts and extroverts is that an extrovert will walk into a room full of people and draw all the energy in that room from those people to themselves and be fueled by it. Whereas an introvert will go into a room and the room will suck the energy from the introvert outwards. And I definitely feel that. And I think that one of the things possibly why I've pursued photography was deep down on a sort of deep down existential level. I needed it in order to as a method by which to have interaction with other human beings, because without it, if you took it away from me, I wouldn't go out, I wouldn't talk to anyone. I'm always that person in the party who is happy to stay in the corner and just literally observe the room and draw observational conclusions about every wanker in the room from just standing there and not talking to anyone.
I think I might be the wanker in the room.
That's okay. I'm friends with lots of wankers. It's all right. But to go back to your question, which is I'm sort of finding quite hard to. The advice. I mean, the only advice I really have would be really much more to do with the politics of the profession, of how to advance up the snakes and ladders board of the world of photography and publishing and advertising and all that. But that's a different. That's more to do with political. That's how to advance inside a political system, you know, which even to this day I'm pretty naive about. I know people who I think, there's one thing I do, which is I play this game with myself, or I ask other people this question, which is if you drew a graph with a vertical and horizontal axis, and on that the vertical axis was say ability or talent, and the horizontal axis was ability to network, hustle, be political, and you had to trade off one against the other, you know, so you would have to give away a percentage of your talent or ability for an equal measure of hustle ability, of how much would you give away? What percentage of your ability? And I think about this a lot, and I've come to the conclusion that I would happily give away. I feel like I have. This is going to sound, and I don't mean this to sound braggy. I don't at all. But I feel like I have 30% excess ability that often is really not called upon in the situations. It's like being a footballer and you know, just playing to 70% of your capacity because that's all that the game requires. You know, you can still score, you still think, you know, and maybe once in a while in a World Cup final, you've got to use 100%. But sometimes I feel like I have 25 to 30% accessibility in most of the jobs I do. I could do a better job than I'm being asked to do if I was given the resources to do it. More time, more budget, bigger set, you know, whatever. So I would happily give away that 25-30% because it's hardly ever used. And in exchange, I will take 30% more hustle and flow ability in order to play the game, network, know how to... you know, I have a friend who's pretty good, well-known fashion photographer who I'm not going to say his name here, but his ability to go into a room, a party of 200 people, and somehow magically identify the one person in the room who could be useful to him on a career ladder progression level. His ability to identify that person, find them, corner them, and then occupy their time for an hour and a half is just unbelievable. And I look at him and I'm just like, how did you even do that? How did you have the chutzpah to approach that person and engage them on a level whereby they are not only willing to talk to you, but also kind of surrender to your charms? And I look at that and I'm extremely envious of it.
So that's interesting, because I guess my next question was going to be, you know, what the three most important skills for a photographer that they need to possess in order to sustain a career, and that obviously sounds like an important skill, and yet you're saying that you feel like you don't have as much of it as you'd like, and you've managed to sustain your career for this long. What other elements do you think there are in terms of things that if you were coming into the industry now, you'd be looking to cultivate that you think are important to sustain a career? We're not just talking about being a shooting star.
Flexibility, adaptability, and also the ability to shrug off your ego when you need to, and instead recognize a serendipitous moment when it presents itself to you. So you may go into a shoot. This whole shoot, I've decided, is going to be blue. We're having blue background, we're having blue clothes, blue lights, everything's blue. And then maybe something happens where your subject walks in and they're wearing a red hat. And rather than go, oh my God, this red hat is ruining my blue shoot, it's the ability to just kind of bend like a sapling, like a tree. Because I think having an ego that won't allow you to acknowledge that possibly today your idea isn't meant to be, allows you to adapt and maybe produce a result that's better despite your idea, or in spite of your idea. It's just being able to, I think you have to leave your ego at the door in order to allow others to keep theirs. And by doing that, people will see you as a pleasant force in the room. Maybe I'm speaking a bit elliptically, I don't know, but it's I've seen people who can't let go of the baggage they walked into the room with, and therefore the entire day is being bent out of shape in order to accommodate this baggage that the main ego person brought in with them. rather than just going, fuck it, I was going to do that, but you know what, this is much better. Let's do this. And that comes from being comfortable with who you are and happy with who you are, and a big enough person to be able to say, sod it, you know, this is better. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that's left, once everyone's left and gone home and gone to bed and got up the next morning, the only thing that's left is the work. And if you can hold the work up and say, this work is great, no one cares, you know, in the end, how you arrived at that destination. You know, it's just the ability, ultimately, metaphorically, it's the ability to alter your course, you know, according to the conditions, you know, rather than stick to what the...
That can also be a stressor, though, can't it? The fact that sometimes you can be on a job and then things out of your control haven't worked out or haven't lined up, and you know that at the end of the day, no one's going to care, because they probably won't even know that the train was late with the talent on it, or the taxi was late.
No one cares.
Whatever.
No one cares.
They just care about the end product.
No one cares that you only had 5 minutes with that person, with that subject, in a basement room that's only 6'6" high, and you know,
I'll be all right.
And no PowerPoints. No one cares. What they care about is the end result. You know, I mean, I use music a lot. As a way to draw comparisons with photography, and you know, that you could get music actually is where I use when you get into the film digital thing. You know, no one listens to a song and says, well, you know, they recorded this on analog tape rather than into a Pro Tools digital thing.
Yeah.
Like the 15-year-old girl listening to that song doesn't care. She just thinks, I like that song. You know, and it's, do you like that picture? Yes, I like that picture. How did you do it? I don't give a fuck. It's, you know, I mean, we do. Sure. But our clients don't necessarily care, and the people that look at it and the people that rip it out of a magazine and stick it on their bedroom wall don't care. It's just like, you know, and so it's very easy to get caught up in technique and all that. I mean, we've kind of gone miles away from what your original question was.
No, it's good. I mean, it's exploring the idea of what, I mean, obviously what you're basically talking about, as you said, is being able to leave your ego at the door, and the idea of being flexible and adaptable to be able to change not only from day to day, but I guess also if you're thinking of a longer term career, you've got to be able to change with the technology, you've got to be able to change with the requirements, you know, switching from being able to produce photographs to being able to produce, in inverted commas, content, and where that sits and what that requires with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess
going back to your question about what advice would you give your 20-year-old self, one of the things I've discovered is that if you look like you know what you're doing, people generally think that you do know what you're doing. So the idea is you must maintain a swan-like demeanor the entire day, so that if you are seen to panic, then, you know, like any situation, panic is infectious. And so quite often, you know, with my assistants and stuff, they'll be like, so what are we doing? And I'll say, yeah, I don't really know, I haven't figured it out yet, so just look busy, just put lights up. And I quite often use the setup time, the putting, literally physically putting equipment up, getting it out. I use that time to actually work out what I want to do quite often. And I will slow or speed up the pace of that activity according to how confident I feel about what it is I want to do. And it's kind of thinking time. And also it gives you the opportunity to kind of get to know your subject, because, you know, obviously I'm a people photographer. You know, I'm not doing still life or landscapes. I'm doing people, and I have to get to know the subject as well. And you know, I can't tell you what I'm going to cook until till I know what ingredients are in the kitchen. I need to see what's in the kitchen before I can put some oil in the saucepan, you know.
And it's interesting because that, in a way, speaks to me of a similar approach sometimes of actually enjoying the process of going along and putting a bit of pressure on yourself creatively in terms of having to react to what you find rather than going along with too many preconceived ideas. But then that itself can make the entire experience incredibly more, much more stressful.
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to the thing you said about that Marty Feldman quote. I don't enjoy doing things, but I do enjoy having done things, which I completely get, because it's how I feel about it. I wake up on the day of a job. I wake up absolutely laden with dread, like a portentous, like heavy feeling, and even down to the fact that I've got to get, the game we're in involves a lot of like heavy bags and equipment and cases and things that you've cut yourself on and bang your knee on a stand, bruise your leg, and even down to the thing of like having to load the car with equipment. It's like, I really begrudge having to do this. Please, why can't we just do it tomorrow instead? That's how I wake up, because I'm dreading. There's a saying that old blues musicians used to use about, they referred to their musical ability as a burden. Their job, particularly like the old, the kind of Delta Mississippi cotton bluesmen, where all the songs were about having a relationship with God and the devil, and the misery of slavery and working, long hours in hot cotton fields, and the music that all that blues music was really about transmitting those feelings, and they called it a burden. And there's all these blues songs where they talk about lay my burden down, and to some degree I sort of do think of it like that, because I know that at some point I will, in the future, I will enjoy having done this, but I am not enjoying having to go and do it. And it's also, the other thing people don't realise is that because you're judged on, and you're not only are we judged by others, we judge ourselves on the job, on the work we did today. And it is a horrible feeling coming back from a day and just thinking, that was fucking shit. And how the hell am I gonna, how am I gonna live with myself? And then people I know who don't, I have friends that don't do what we do, and they go to jobs where they're expected to perform a function or a task, and they get, in exchange for that, they get handed some money every 30 days. And it's quite binary. Our jobs we are not in a binary. It's not binary what we do. It's extremely complicated in terms of like emotionally, physically, technically. There are all kinds of other things tied up in it. Our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with other people, our what we think of ourselves, or what we think other people think of us. And yet you go along to a shoot, and then for those people, quite often, if you're doing a commercial shoot, there's a bunch of people in the studio. For them, this is just a really nice day out of the office with catering.
Yeah.
So following on from that, I guess what I'm interested in is how you maintain an element of a creative drive, because I think the reality of what we do for a job means that it's a real emotional roller coaster, not to get overly dramatic about it, but there is a real kind of sense of beating yourself up sometimes, and you have highs and lows, because as you said, you very much get judged on your work. You're every time you produce something creatively, you're opening yourself up to criticism, you're opening yourself up to judgment, and God knows we all do enough of that ourselves and beat ourselves up enough. So what techniques have you found, if any, for stoking that engine for motivation and creative drive and excitement about what you're doing?
Ooh. I think that what I try to do on any given day is find an element and some days there are more elements available than other days, but find at least one element that I can latch onto, and that becomes my motivating force. So it may be, oh, this could look like a scene from a 1954 Henry Fonda film that I love. I can give you an example of that. Actually, there was years ago, like 2007, I was commissioned to follow Sebastian Coe. He was in charge of the London Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
I got commissioned by the Observer Sport Monthly to spend a week with him. And the problem was, as great as Coe was, and he was really open and totally amenable to me coming along, he never once said you can't. I think there was only one meeting in a week where he had to go in a room and it was completely top secret and I wasn't allowed in. But other than that, he said you could just come everywhere with me. So, but the problem was, from a photographic point of view, was that he was just in all these really drab, mundane conference meeting rooms at City Hall. There was a porter cabin we went to at the site of the Olympic Stadium when it was still just a flat site of rubble.
Building site, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a porter cabin. So he had this meeting in this porter cabin with all the members of the GLA, the Greater London Authority, who are obviously major players in the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there were lots of people in the GLA who were against the Olympics in the first place, who didn't even want it. So they were looking for any excuse to kind of hammer him on matters of budget and organisation and stuff like this. So I was like, God, these rooms are so boring. And it's just people in suits and ties, and it's just, it's great to listen to because there's real debate going on amongst these people, but it wasn't great from a stills point of view. And then I suddenly remembered this Henry Fonda film, 12 Angry Men, which is about the whole film takes place in a jury room after a trial in which the jury deliberate the guilt of the accused. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole film. And it's just 12 people in this room. And it's black and white film, 1950s. And I just suddenly remembered that film. And that because what I could see was literally 12 people sitting down with Coe standing up the whole time, having to answer their kind of questions. So I kind of quietly I had some little lights with me and stuff, and I kind of quietly got them out and I started putting them up, and I kind of tried to lit this room in the style of 12 Angry Men and then, made it really cinematic. And so to go back to your question, what keeps me motivated or inspired creatively is the idea of trying to create something that isn't necessarily there in real life. So that's a really good example. And to this day, I really love those pictures. There's drama in them because that was what was happening in the room, but it required the use of cinematic lighting as a signifier of that, for that drama, because it's a style of lighting that's, film noir, kind of very hard lights, very lighting that you don't see in movies anymore, and lighting really that was from like the 40s and 50s in cinema. And so that's what motivates me, is the idea of trying to do something that elevates it above what it might be, elevates it above the reality that it is. And so that's in a scenario where you don't necessarily have a lot of control either. It wasn't me choosing these. I was commissioned to follow him around, and I have to make something from that. I noticed recently there was a New York Times, I think it's New York Times, pictures of the Italian doctors in, coronavirus. I don't know who the photographer is. It's an Italian photographer. But I looked at them, and he's kind of done the same thing. He's lit these emergency rooms. I'm going to have to go away and look it up, or if you want to look it up. They're all black and white. They're lit in a very contrasty way, but then they're printed or processed in a very flat way. So it's contrasty lighting, but very flat in the processing. So the tones are all there. And it's kind of the same thing. So I sort of saw that, and I was like, oh yeah, he's had the same idea. So, because he's
done a very good. Yeah, I think he did a very good book called Scene.
Right.
I believe that was. I'd need to check that, but yeah, I think that is his work. Magnum photographer Alex Maggioli.
Right.
He shoots everything almost with these single little flash bulbs kind of around
totally.
very high sync.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I did that 15 years ago.
It sounds like it was done in a film before that. So,
then someone did it before that, and there's a whole
that's creativity, isn't it?
Yeah, that's creativity. Is that you take, I think of it as like a big casserole pot, and you take the things you're influenced by, and you basically steal those things. You're stealing them. You're just outright ripping them off. But then what happens is you then have your own set of ingredients that you add to the pot, and maybe you steal a bit of something else from somewhere else that's completely different to the first thing you stole, and you and then you've got your own bits, and you chuck all that in the pot, and then it it goes on the stove and it stews for a bit, and then by the time it comes out, it's yours, and it's. I mean, I've got a playlist. I've got a Spotify playlist that I keep going, which is it's songs that basically the Beatles plagiarized, and songs from which they directly nicked things to create their own work. There's a Beatles song, Lady Madonna, and it is a complete and utter direct rip-off of 1950s jazz tune by a guy called Humphrey Lyttelton. Yeah. It's called Bad Penny Blues is the original. If you find Bad Penny Blues by Humphrey Lyttelton, it's where Paul McCartney got Lady Madonna from. And I've got a whole playlist of songs that the Beatles ripped off, and you can hear, but they're their own thing as well.
Planning a lawsuit?
No, it's just I just find that idea that creativity is not new ideas are not born in a vacuum. And everyone takes from somewhere else and creates their own and creates new things from it. So that quite often, I look for things that I can. Well, how can I make this my own today? What can I do? So that's what I try. That's the thing that keeps me going creatively. Is the idea? Because I've been doing it for such a long time now. 27 years, and I have huge. On my Instagram account for quite a long time, I had my little bio thing just said wisdom is a big collection of mistakes, and what I mean by that is that you do make mistakes. You can't improve without making mistakes. You have to, that's how you get better at things. I years and years ago, I did a shoot with an actress for GQ magazine. I put some clip lights behind her shoulders. It's the first time I'd ever tried this. I put these lights behind her to kind of hair lights. When I got the film back, she had these horrible shadows of her shut because I put the lights too low, right? So the lights were behind her and they were just slightly lower than her shoulders. So they cast a shadow of the shoulder right across the middle of her cheeks on both sides, and it looked horrible.
Looked like a beard line.
Yeah, it looked like a beard line, and I was just like, and this was in the days of film, so I didn't realise this until got the film back, and and I was just like, oh my god, I can't believe what I've done, First of all, I was like, how did that happen? And then I worked out what I'd done. This was 25 years ago, and then so there you go. That's absolutely, at the time it was awful. It's the worst thing that had ever happened to me. But 25 years later, I'm just like, that is just one tiny example of how I know where to put a clip light when I want. I
was going to say there's a distinct absence of artificial beard line marks in your current portfolio.
I've worked very hard at that over the years.
I guess in a way, some people kind of launching into the career, they assist for that reason. But like you said, I think it's very difficult to learn from other people's mistakes, because quite often those lessons just don't have the poignancy or the emotional impact that requires you to actually learn them.
You have to be wounded in the heart for it to mean anything, mortally wounded.
Mortally wounded. Not even a scratch. It's a full-on mortally wounded.
On that at that moment, you must feel like, oh, I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm never working for these people again. Mm-hmm. Professionally mortally wounded. I mean, but
we've all had it.
When I did do some, I didn't do tons of assisting, but I did bits and bobs, and I worked for. I can't actually remember who the photographer was now, but he was doing a book with Raymond Blanc, the chef, who owns a very famous, 3-star Michelin restaurant, Le Manoir, and in Oxfordshire near Henley. And we went there one day to photograph some dishes, some of the food. And he spent, and this is early 90s. He shot all on transparency on 5.4. It's a very slow process. He took absolutely hours and hours to do this one dish, and they kept making the dish over and over again, because obviously it had to be fresh. Mm-hmm. And hours and hours and hours, and then he completely changed the setup, and he tossed off 2 sheets of film on this alternative setup, and spent 15 minutes on it when the first shot he'd spent 6 hours on. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, he said to me, "You're probably wondering why I did that so quickly. And this is why. It's very important when you're commissioned by a client, always give them something to reject." And I was just like, oh my God, I think that's probably the best lesson I've ever learned. If you make a client feel like you're railroading them into a decision, they will resent you and hold it against you. Whereas if you say, I've done this, which I think is really fabulous, and I've also done this, and you kind of don't telegraph it too much, that obviously you don't want them to pick the wrong one, because they will pick the wrong one. But if you make them feel like they've got a choice, they will feel that you're collaborative and cooperative and enjoyable to work with. Whereas if you're diva-ish about it all, they may like telling other people that they're working with you publicly, but privately they will resent having to spend time with you to a certain extent. So that's another lesson I learned, which was the value of giving them something to reject, because it makes them feel like they're part of the process.
I've heard film editors actually using the same technique. They'll put mistakes in an edit because they know that they need to have something that
I've done
people
that.
come back on.
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I've done that with film. Yeah. Leave something in because that goes back to the thing I was saying earlier about ego. Because it's not just you that has an ego. Your client has an ego too, and you have to give them the feeling that that they are yes, he's working for me. You have to make them, think that or believe that what you do is under their control. So to leave something in, leave a mistake in, or leave something in for them to change, it gives them. Whereas if there's nothing to change, they're going to find something. They're going to pick something that you don't want them to change. Yeah,
of course. When you say you leave a mistake in, are you kind of talking about a Downton Abbey water bottle, or like a Game of Thrones Starbucks cup, or
we can make it. I mean, one of the things I do is make it a bit too long. If it's a film thing, I'll make it too long. If it needs to be 2 minutes, I'll make it 2 minutes 20.
You give them a Tarantino edit,
and then they can go scissor hands on it. So that's the thing with it's harder with stills to make it's much harder with stills to do something where, I mean, the only thing I do quite often is I'll over edit in terms of get too many selects. There was there was a guy who was a picture editor at the Sunday Times for years, like 30 years. I'm trying to remember what his name was. He's dead now. But he used to do this thing where the paper, the people on the paper would go, we're doing a story about XYZ. We need some pictures of it. Can you get some in? Mm-hmm. And he would go away and he'd come back with pictures, and he'd go, yeah, I've come back with, here's 12 pictures. And then he would wait until pretty close to the deadline, and he would go back and say, do you know what, I've been doing a bit more research on that subject, and I went off and I've had a word with some contacts I have, and I've managed to come up with these extra ones as well, which I think are pretty good. And he would slap a few more pictures down on the desk. And what he'd done was he had them the whole time, and he just kept them. He just kept them in a drawer in his desk, and he just waited until 10 minutes before the deadline. And it made people think that he was incredibly diligent, and he was like a dog. He was like a dog with a bone. He just wouldn't give up on it. When really he'd just done it all in one go, and he just kept some back, and then it just created the feeling that he was incredibly thorough.
That is brilliant.
When really he just used his time more smartly.
I mean, that is pretty smart. That is pretty smart, to be fair.
I also learnt from him. He used to always ask for blank receipts from taxi drivers and restaurants.
I couldn't possibly ever comment on something like that.
Yeah,
we've none. I don't think any of us ever do that.
I actually interned at the Sunday Times magazine.
Did you? Vince. He was called Vince.
I witnessed that happening. So, do you have any further questions, Tom?
Do you know what? I think that kind of covered
questions that we can...
way more than I was hoping. So that's fantastic. Yeah. We do have, Chris, a couple of questions that we're going to be asking all of our guests. And these are quite almost quick fire ones. So current crisis, obviously included or kind of taken on board. What do you think the future of where the industry is heading is going to kind of be looking like? Where do you see it like 20 years from now?
It's sort of, in some ways it's exciting.
In some ways it's a bit of an open-ended one as well.
I mean, I have no idea, to be honest. I mean, in some ways it's quite exciting from a creatively. I think it's very exciting. There's, the things that you're able to do now because of technology are kind of unimaginable. When I think back to like when I went to college and did a BTEC in photography in 1988, and when I think back to that time and like how far we've come and the things that we can do, it's just unimaginable compared to 30 odd years ago. So creatively, I think it's very exciting. I think professionally, from the earning a living and doing this as a way of life, I'm not so optimistic, because I think let's be honest, the market is so oversaturated with not only competent but extremely talented photographers, and that's the kind of downside of the availability and of the technology, is that because the technology is there's so much amazing technology, and it's enabled people to unleash kind of creativity to such a degree. It means that there are so many more people who are capable of doing what the market is asking of them, that it can only, if you go by supply and demand economics, it can only lower the price of everything to the point where it will be difficult to earn a sustainable living doing this, because when I started out, it was like alchemy photography involved. There were people that were incredibly brilliant photographers were almost like magicians, because what they did happened literally in the shadows. You had to understand chemistry, you have to understand light, you have to understand a light meter, you have to understand what to do in a dark room, feeling your way around, in the pitch black, and there was a real, charisma. They were there. It was enigmatic, the role of the photographer when I was a kid. And now it's not mysterious because, like my 15-year-old daughter makes really funny, clever videos that she puts on TikTok. And they are quite often really funny. She's at the age of 12. She was doing things that I would never have been able to do at 12. I mean, she did a film when she was 12, or 11, where she understood. She had such an innate understanding of cutting and editing, and a camera's point of view. She put a camera in. This is not a big deal for a filmmaker, but for an 11-year-old to understand this, she put a camera in the fridge. So she did a shot of someone going to the fridge. Then she did another shot where the camera was in the fridge. They do that a lot in Breaking Bad, actually, don't they? Things like that. But the thing that struck me was that an 11-year-old understood the language of filmmaking enough to be able to do the point of view, a camera's point of view from inside the fridge as someone opens the door and takes out a bottle of milk, for example. So, I think
people are more visually literate than we were.
Oh, absolutely. People are so visually literate now in a way that they weren't, 30 years ago. The other thing is I think you're going to have the very top of the industry is always going to be there. You're going to have the need for like huge productions with things like cars and shooting cars or shooting big complicated subjects. That's all going to be there. But the sector of the industry in a way which is been going to be or has been butchered or is shortly to be completely butchered is the world I grew up in, which is the world of editorial and magazines and stuff like that. Because you take a thing like Instagram and it's people can go direct to the audience now on Instagram, can't they? So, or Facebook or Twitter or all those things. And people, the whole, I mean, if you go back even 15, 20 years to say a magazine like Vanity Fair, that whole idea of the Vanity Fair big movie star interview, in which Demi Moore is photographed pregnant, it was a real event. It was a real groundbreaking cover, that Vanity Fair cover of Demi Moore pregnant, shot by Annie Leibovitz. Those moments of, in a way, of that's kind of gone now, and so I think in the 20 years, the world that I kind of aspired to be in, when I was a kid, all I wanted to do was work for magazines and do record covers and movie posters was my dream, and this whole world that we're in now of like content for social, I mean, it's not as glamorous really as having the cover of a magazine.
You can't frame it and put it on the wall, can you?
No. I mean, there's Ian Birch has an Instagram account. Hang on, I'm gonna just. He's IBMH15, and he did a book called Uncovered: Revolutionary Magazine Covers. The inside stories told by the people who made them. But on his Instagram account, he puts up editorial, great covers from current stuff that's out now this month's. He's been putting up all these Portuguese Vogue covers from the last year or so that are absolutely amazing. And then just covers from the history of magazines. And there's so much great stuff that he puts up. It's really inspiring. But what's so sad about it is that that's never going to happen again. In a way.
No.
It's just not going to mean. It doesn't mean anything to people anymore. My kids' generation, they don't buy magazines. They don't. My 11-year-old's obsessed with Billie Eilish, and there was I had something recently where Billie Eilish is on the cover and an interview with her. And I gave it to her and said, look, have you seen this cover of Billie? So she'd seen the photos. She wasn't that interested in the interview. Mm-hmm. She'd already seen the photos online, and the whole idea of actually holding a physical product made of paper and reading it was kind of alien to her, and she didn't really know what to do with it. And but when I was like maybe a bit older than her, you know, I was like really excited when the, you know, next month's issue of The Face or ID or Arena or all the music magazines like Select, it's, you know, Smash Hits, Vox, all these kind of music mags. It was kind of exciting what was in there, because that was your only access to what those people were doing. You know, there was no other way to read about them and stuff, you know.
And it'd be only once a month or once a week, and it felt special. There was like a real...
it felt special.
It felt like you were getting a reward for spending the money on the magazine. You'd read it and you'd be like, oh yeah, that's cool. I found this out. And that would be my reward. Now, for me, especially like when I'm going through Instagram and stuff, there doesn't feel like I don't get anything back.
There's not. Well, that's because there's nothing to look forward to. So when magazines were coming out, you knew that the magazine you like was out on this day of the month. You know, that always comes out on the 7th of the month or whatever. And you knew that you could go to the newsagents and it would be there, and you would buy it. And, you know, that fact that you have to pay for it was also, you know, you were putting your money where your mouth is, you know, and so, you know, and you had that, and you take it home. And I mean, my earliest memory of this is there was a football comic called Roy of the Rovers, you know, when I was a kid, and we used to get it, you know, it was delivered every Saturday, and the newsagent would deliver it. And I mean, the feeling of waking up on a Saturday morning and going downstairs and seeing Roy of the Rovers on the doormat, I'll never forget that feeling of being like 8 years old, and then picking that up and then just going back to my bedroom on a Saturday. Don't have to go to school. Got a Roy of the Rovers. Just get back into bed, and then you kind of lose yourself in that for an hour or two. That feeling of looking forward to that we don't have that anymore because of the immediacy of everything now. So everything, and also you're just discovering you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and everything has a kind of democrat. It means everything and nothing, because there's a democracy about it, but it's a devalued democracy where it's not. You know, I put the stuff I put on Instagram. You know, for me, it's invested. You know, I have an investment in it, an emotional investment, and then a time, the investment of my time, where I've did it and I've written something about it, and I give it a work. For me, it has a value. For me, you know, and other people, it doesn't necessarily have a value, but I do try to give something to people that will at least take them away. Take them into a little magical place for a minute or two, and for them to think, well, yeah, I like that guy's stories. That's interesting, and that's the best you can hope for now, in a way, you know. And
I wonder if, I mean, some people are managing to monetize that by kind of using Patreon and things, other platforms like that. I wonder if that takes over from instead of having a magazine and an editorial board, whether or not it comes down to the individuals that people end up being interested enough in. I guess in some ways now you can make up for the fact that your magazine isn't going to sell by the fact that your digital version is going to have a worldwide global audience. And if you can monetize that, then perhaps you can, you know, make that worthwhile. But it's interesting. I think you've raised some really interesting points there.
I mean, I wonder if we're going back to a time before, when you think about, say, music, the period of time in which the biggest selling musical acts were able to make enormous fortunes from selling records and touring and stuff like that. It was really relatively small, really, because before the advent of recorded music, the only way to earn money as a musician was literally to be like a wandering minstrel, wasn't it? You know, and then recorded music gets invented, and so you go from like maybe maybe the late 40s onwards, into the 50s, into rock and roll. 60s, I mean the 70s seems to me to have probably been, or 70s and 80s seems to have been the peak period for it as a business, you know. And I guess maybe into the 90s when lots of stuff, 80s and 90s when vinyl, all the stuff got reissued on CDs and they were selling it all over again on CDs. It's only a small period of time, 30, 40 years. And you know, maybe it was an anomaly. It's an anomaly, really, because ultimately, I guess what people like us do, I don't know if it's of value. It doesn't have it's not like making, you know, a car or even all this equipment that we actually use. You know, computers and cameras and voice recorders and phones and stuff. You know, what we do is like in the air, isn't it? You know, we create stuff it's nice to look at. But
well, Chris, it's quite like making a car. You know, it does take people on a journey. Oh dear me, terrible. Sorry.
Cul-de-sac.
Cul-de-sac. Yeah. Single carriage, end of the road.
It's, you know, I don't want to be too pessimistic about it, but I think there'll be, you know, the need for, you know, the need for people at the very top end of the game to do their thing will always be there. But I also
think it's worth having that realism, like you know, this is all valid because it is what understanding what is likely to come is what allows you to be adaptable.
Yeah.
And this is the whole point of this podcast: is we're not trying to sugarcoat anything. We're not trying to mislead anyone. We are just saying, you know, this is our experience. This is how we think things are going. Being very honest with people.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I think about it, when I kind of zoom out of myself and look down on it from a great height, you know, like I'm 51. I've been doing this for like over half my life. I've had a pretty good life. I'm not rich, but I'm not poor. I've got a house. I've got a great family. Touch wood. I've got my health. All those things. And then zooming out even further, I just think, well, you know what? Actually, I have done so far the thing that I was most inspired by when I was 18, which was I wasn't inspired by the idea of being rich or anything like that. What I was inspired by were people who had documented the era in which they had lived. You know, and you need those people because, you know, without those 2 or 3 pictures, how the hell would we know what Abraham Lincoln even looked like? You know. So I like the idea of the fact that actually ultimately my employer is not Condé Nast or Saatchi & Saatchi or the BBC. My employer is posterity. I work on behalf of posterity so that people who are alive after I've gone can know what these other people that were here when I was here looked like, what they, you know, how they dressed, what their attitude was in front of a camera, all those small things that make it compelling when you go into the National Portrait Gallery and look at paintings by Holbein of the Tudors. You know, it's you're just part of that lineage, and that's quite, you know, that's quite a nice feeling to have, actually. So it's not that bad.
The last 2 quickfire questions we have, and these are going to be slightly more quickfire, I think, than that one. Talking about kind of prosperity and
posterity, I said.
Posterity, not prosperity. Enjoying
good point.
What photo book would you say at the moment is kind of you'd consider one of your favourites?
I've got 2. Can I have 2? Does it have to be one?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a desert island thing. I'm not going to be harsh on you, yeah.
Imagine you've got quite a big case that fits 2 books.
Yeah.
Lee Friedlander's American Musicians
okay,
is probably the one I would say first in a fire. Lee Friedlander, one of his jobs he was a house photographer for Atlantic Records. I think it was Atlantic. I have to check that. And in the course of that gig, he photographed pretty much everybody. No, it wasn't Atlantic. Anyway, we can check it. But he's documented pretty much everyone from who was great in American music from kind of from the 50s to the 70s, and everyone who's anyone in American music. Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Frank Sinatra, Aretha Franklin, you're just on and on and on and on. And it's not just the subject matter, it's also just his photography is just beautiful. His use of colour, his use of light, his wit, his style, it's just glorious. So Lee Friedlander's American Musicians is one, and then the other one is a book called The Commissar Vanishes, which was compiled by a guy called David King, who was the creative director or art director at the Sunday Times magazine for a long time. And he had a huge collection of Soviet-era propaganda. And The Commissar Vanishes is a book of propaganda and imagery from the Stalin period. And the effect of censorship and the hand retouchers art. So you have several examples often of the same photograph and how it existed in the public realm at various points during Stalin's reign. So you might have a picture with 5 people in it originally, but then one of them has been eliminated. So in a later version of that photo, that guy's been retouched out and been replaced by a pot plant. But then this is
it's very dark.
but then at some point after that guy has now been pardoned and posthumously pardoned, and he's been inserted back into the photo, and someone else has been removed from it because it's brilliant study of propaganda and manipulation and fake news and just everything, and just the skill of the hand retouchers actually as well.
Sounds very relevant.
So that would be my other book. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you got your 2 books in your suitcase, and then the last one is always your desert island camera, which is a bit of a weird one because I don't know what you're going to be shooting on your desert island, but
that's an easy one because I've had lots and lots of cameras over the years, but the one which I've had for 30 years, which I've been using during this lockdown period, is my Bronica SQA.
I have one of them.
Which is
you have it on your desk to hand. How
there he is. Helpful. Look at that. Which is indestructible. All it needs to work is one battery that lasts forever. Although
I have managed to destroy mine.
It's got no electronics to go wrong. It's reliable. It's like a gun that just doesn't stop firing.
Violent analogy.
And it's lovely to hold. It's not as fancy as a Hasselblad. It's a Japanese. It's not even a copy of a Hasselblad. It's just a Japanese. It's just well made. They're well made. They're
What was it?
That's the best thing I've ever heard someone say of a Bronica SQAI.
The gun that doesn't stop firing.
No. I always get told it's a poor man's Hasselblad, but it
is a poor man's Hasselblad. But you know what? It's taken some of my favourite pictures. I've been scanning a lot of the film from it this last few weeks. Pictures of 25 years ago. It's bloody great.
Wow.
I mean, the quality of the film the quality of the neg is perfect.
Fantastic. So what have you been shooting just quickly in your lockdown, just as a little bonus?
My kids, my family, just stuff because the weather's been so amazing. So just esoteric still lives,
we look forward to seeing them.
It's nothing glamorous. It's nothing exciting. It's just sort of stuff it's just personal things, really.
Very nice.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. Will you be putting them? So, just for our listeners, obviously, if you want to actually look at any of Chris's work, you can head along to his website, which is just chrisfloyd.com. And what's you're on Instagram, Chris? You are, aren't you?
I've got two. I've just done a second account. I've got Chris Floyd, and then I've got Chris Floyd Archive. So I've started to just use that as a place to put all my stories and stuff.
Excellent.
And the weird thing is that's happened in this last few weeks is that I've had more inquiries than usual, than ever, for people wanting to buy prints, which is what it's made me think I should do an archive account and then,
yes,
try and open up an exciting new revenue stream. I've started to put all the old stuff.
Yeah, well, that's good. It's part of that adaptability you mentioned earlier, and moving with the times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been great to hear your little. Hopefully, there's some nuggets of wisdom that people can take away. I know that there's certainly stuff that I learnt for the first time. Always a fan of your anecdotes, and that David Cameron one, I'm sure I'll be retelling in the pub when the pubs reopen. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on today, Chris.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much for tuning in this week. We really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you'd like to know more about today's guest and to read the show notes that we've carefully and lovingly prepared for you, it's over on the website at exposednegative.com, and you can find us on Instagram at xnegative. So that is EX negative. And we will see you all next week. Thank you very much for tuning in.